Oh yes, I can see how that would work. In order to bolster my defense, I just let myself be hit by daggers made of ice and falling rocks and giant fireballs. This is sounding like a frickin' Zen riddle. How much sense does it make that you bolster your defense by letting yourself get hit? Later on in the game, when the enemies get much more powerful and take off a lot more hit points, you're not gonna want to let them do that. The game's item and inventory system is also really wonky too. There's no currency system in the game, so you cannot buy items. Instead, you either find them in treasure chests, of which there is a limited supply in the game, of course. You can get enemies to drop them, but this only happens like once in a blue moon, and I've only had it happen to me like once or twice, and even then they were useless items. Or you find specific people in the towns who will give you a specific item, and only one specific item. And they will only give you their one specific item if you do not have a copy of that item in your inventory already. So, if you've gone through the entire game and ransacked all the treasure chests and whatnot, you're basically limited to one copy of one item, and only items that people will give you in the game. And by the end of the game, if you're good at saving your items, your inventory is going to be crowded with dozens of useless ones. Ones that you will never use because they're either status effects or status ailment curing, things that you would not use because you would want to cause damage to the enemy. So you have no choice but to scroll left and right through your inventory to find items that you want, because guess what? You can't even organize your own inventory. And this is extraordinarily frustrating, especially when you're looking for one specific healing item. The bosses in this game are also extraordinarily annoying, mostly because, first off, there aren't many of them. There's only a total of about 6 or 7 bosses throughout the entire game, and all of them, you will pretty much use the exact same strategy. Keep your distance so that they only use their dodgeable long-ranged attack, and then use an element that they're either weak against, or just use a spell that reaches a long distance so that you don't have them get close to you, and just keep spamming that until they die, healing as needed. After that, you just gather up the items that they have, and you leave. And you do this for every single one of the bosses, and there is absolutely no change. Well, actually, that's not true. There is one major change from this formula, and sadly, it is in the final boss. I say that it's sad because he's by and large the easiest boss in the entire game, even if you are playing on a balanced game, mostly because he always uses the same 3 spells no matter what distance you are from him, meaning that you can just stand next to him and beat him to death with your stick, and that is actually a preferable strategy compared to just throwing spells at him. Yes, beating an all-powerful 1,000-year-old demon to death with a walking stick. Great climax, game. Great climax. So I think I've firmly established that I don't really care for this in terms of gameplay. But what about graphics and music? I mean, there's gotta be something positive about this game, right? Well, believe it or not, there is. It's small, but I'll take what I can get at this point. I will say that the character models and the environments are very impressive, especially for the Nintendo 64. This was basically a game that proved that a wide, sprawling world was possible to pull off on a Nintendo 64 cartridge, but much like the rest of the game, it feels very empty and vacant. Even the towns seem to lack a real sense of bustling community. It's especially bad that the graphics actually look very generic when you're in a place like a forest, a dungeon, or a cave. The game does not give you any maps to navigate these areas with, and as such, it is very easy to get spun around or lose your way in these places, which often results in you having to backtrack, and sometimes you accidentally end up walking all the way back through a dungeon just to come out the same way in. And yes, this has happened to me several times. The music in the game is much in the same boat. It's alright, and it's not bad by any means, but it does feel very generic, and you will get tired of it after a while. It's basically because they keep recycling the same songs over and over. They basically use the same instrumental tune depending on what environment you're in. For example, you have the field theme, the forest theme, the cave theme, and among others, the one you'll be hearing the most is, of course, the battle theme. Now, before I end this review, there is one more thing that I need to discuss, because it is very pertinent, especially considering the genre that this game is in. And that's the fact that, in this game, death really doesn't have any consequences. I'm being serious here. There really is no consequence for death in this game. If you die, you don't lose any money since there's no currency system, and all of your items are intact unless you ended up using them during the battle. The worst that happens when you die is that, well, you get sent back to the last inn that you stayed at, and the game doesn't even force you to restart from your last save or anything. Which is actually rather surprising considering that the game data is saved on the memory pack and not on the card itself. Really, the only consequence for death is that you'll have to fight your way back through the dungeon that you were in previously, which isn't really so bad because it gives you a chance to earn more experience. While the game did try to have some interesting concepts, the whole thing just feels like a cliched and broken mess. And quite honestly, it feels like the game wasn't even finished at some points, given how empty the game feels and the broken nature of the magic system. Come to think of it, this game would actually work a bit better when released way back on an 8 or even an early 16-bit console, but as it stands, this game really is just that. It's a mess. I'm sorry if you're offended by that, because once again, I do know that this game has its fan base, and there were actually a few other games in the Quest series released, but neither of them were really tied to this one. One of them being called Quest RPG, and the other being Brian's Quest, both of which were released on the Game Boy Color, and both of them, from what I hear, are exceedingly rare. But, quite honestly, I remember playing this game back as a kid, getting stuck really early on in the forest level, and to be quite honest, this is a game that put me off RPGs for a few years. I never really regained my confidence in the genre again until I picked up Final Fantasy IX. Playing it back again now just puts me in a really bad mood. Nothing's gonna get me out of this stupor.
3, 2, 1, fire!
Well, that worked.
A great adventure is waiting for you ahead. Hurry onward, Lemmywinks, or you will soon be dead. The journey before you may be long and filled with woe, but you must escape the gay man's eye so your tale can be told. Lemmywinks, 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 Lemmywinks. Lemmywinks' journey a distance far and fast to find his way out